The P-40 Warhawk was the best-known Curtiss Wright airplane of World War II. It was also one of the most controversial fighters of the war. It was vilified by many as being too slow, lacking in maneuverability, having too low a climbing rate, and being largely obsolescent by contemporary world standards, even before it was placed in production. The inadequacies of the P-40s were even the subject of a congressional investigation. It gets regularly included on lists of the worst combat aircraft of World War II. All of these criticisms certainly had some degree of validity, but it is also true that the P-40 served its country well during the first year of the war in the Pacific, when very little else was available. Along with the P-39 Air Cobra, the P-40 was the only American fighter available in quantity to confront the Japanese advance during the first year of the Pacific War. It helped stem the speed of the Japanese advance until more modern types could be made available in quantity. The P-40 had no serious vices and was a pleasant aircraft to fly, and when flown by an experienced pilot who was fully aware of its strengths and weaknesses, was able to give a good account of itself in aerial combat. The P-40 continued in production long after later types were readily available, the numbers manufactured reaching the third highest total of American World War II fighters, after the Republic P-47 and the North American P-51. The P-40 was obsolete by European standards even before the first prototype flew, and it never did catch up. Its initial inadequacies in the form of low firepower and lack of self-sealing fuel tanks or armor were a reflection of mid-30s U.S. Army Air Corps requirements, which were outmoded. The P-40 had been developed as basically a low-altitude close support fighter under mid-1930s U.S. tactical concepts, which envisaged more need for low-level ground support operations than for high-altitude interceptions. The military doctrine of the ascendancy of bombardment over pursuit was dominant in 1937 when the P-40 first appeared. This doctrine assumed that the prospect of high-altitude enemy air attack on the USA was extremely remote, with coastal defense and ground attack and the defense of U.S. territory being seen as the main tasks for any future fighter aircraft. Low-altitude performance and rugged construction received priority over high-altitude capabilities. The origin of the P-40 can be traced back to the Curtiss P-36 fighter, which was powered by a radial air-cooled engine. Realizing that the radial-engined P-36A was at the limit of its development, Curtiss designer Donovan Berlin got U.S. Army Air Corps permission in July 1937 to install an 1,150 horsepower Allison V1710-19 liquid-cooled engine with integral supercharging. This project was given the company designation of Model 75P, and the U.S. Army Air Corps gave the project a new fighter designation, XP-40. It flew for the first time on October 14, 1938, with Edward Elliott at the controls. Armament was 2.50-inch machine guns located in the upper fuselage deck and synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, standard armament for U.S. pursuit aircraft at the time. Wing racks could be fitted for 6 20-pound bombs. A small oil cooler was located beneath the pointed nose. The air intake for the single-stage supercharger was mounted on top of the engine cowling between the two machine guns, but during tests it was replaced by a long cowled intake duct, which became characteristic of all the early P-40 production models. Initially, the coolant radiator was placed under the fuselage aft of the wing, but it was gradually moved forward until it finally ended up located underneath the extreme nose. The radiator intake was redesigned to include an oil cooler and 2 coolers for the ethylene glycol engine coolant. The initial XP-40 had a single exhaust port on each side of the fuselage, but in its final form, it had 6 separate exhaust ports on each side. The initial XP-40 had inherited from the P-36 a set of main wheel fairing plates, which covered the main wheels when they retracted into their wing wells. but these were eventually deleted and replaced by two small doors which closed over the wheel struts upon retraction. The maximum speed of the XP-40 was 342 miles per hour at 12,200 feet at a gross weight of 6,260 pounds. This was faster than the Hawker Hurricane, but slower than the Spitfire or the Bf-109E. Empty weight was 5,417 pounds, and fully loaded weight was 6,870 pounds. Range was 460 miles at 299 miles per hour with 100 gallons of fuel. With 159 gallons of fuel at 200 miles per hour, a range of 1,180 miles was claimed, almost twice that of the contemporary Hurricane Spitfire and Bf-109E. Wingspan was 37 feet 4 inches. Wing area was 236 square feet. Length was 31 feet 1 inch, and height was 12 feet 4 inches. The wingspan and wing area remained the same throughout the entire history of the P-40 production run. In the late 1930s, the U.S. Army Air Corps was planning to expand its force, and on April 26, 1939, the Army adopted a conservative approach and ordered 524 production versions under the designation P-40, Curtiss Model 81. At that time, it was the largest ever production order for a U.S. fighter and dwarfed the service test orders placed that same day for YP-38 and YP-39 fighters. The P-40 was similar to the final XP-40 configuration, except for 1,040 horsepower V17-1033 C-15 engines and provisions for the mounting of one .30-inch machine gun in each wing. Flush riveting was used to reduce drag. Armor, bulletproof windshields, and leak-proof fuel tanks were added in service. The P-40 was a relatively clean design and was unusual for the time in having a fully retractable tailwheel. The P-40 lacked such things as armor for the pilot, self-sealing fuel tanks, and a bulletproof windshield, so it was not considered as being suitable for combat. On October 22, 1942, the P-40s still in U.S. Army Air Force service were ordered restricted from combat duty and were redesignated RP-40. At a very early stage, the Curtiss P-40 attracted the attention of foreign air forces. On May 10, 1939, the French ordered 140 export versions of the P-40 for the Armée de l'Air. These aircraft were designated Hawk 81A1 by the manufacturer. The Hawk 81A1s were identical to the US P-40, except that they had French instruments and equipment and were equipped with reverse movement French-fashion throttles. The first of the French-ordered H-81A1s flew on June 6, 1940, and a few were actually completed with French markings. However, before any of their H-81A1s could be delivered, France surrendered. Britain agreed to take over the entirety of the French order and gave the H-81A the name Tomahawk 1 in RAF service. The U.S. Army Air Corps had agreed to defer deliveries of their P-40s so that the Tomahawk could be supplied to Britain as soon as possible. The first Tomahawk reached England in September of 1940. The two .5-inch machine guns in the nose were retained, but they were supplemented by 4 wing-mounted .303-inch Browning machine guns in place of the 7.5mm FN Brownings specified by the French. Such was the urgency of their delivery to Britain that many of the 140 machines still had French instruments and bore cockpit lettering in French when they arrived. However, Britain quickly concluded that these planes were not suitable for combat, since they lacked armor protection for the pilot, armor glass windshields, or self-sealing fuel tanks. Nevertheless, since a German invasion was feared to be imminent, they were actually issued to several operational squadrons. However, the Hun never invaded England, and so the Tomahawks were used only for training roles within Britain. Overseas, the first Desert Air Force squadron to be equipped with Tomahawks was number 112, which exchanged its Gloucester Gladiators for the Curtiss fighter. Number 112 Squadron became famous for its shark's tooth insignia on the engine cowling, and this scheme was later adopted by the American Volunteer Group in China. The Tomahawk 2A, model H-81A2, was equivalent to the U.S. P-40B. It had protective armor and externally covered self-sealing tanks. 110 were built for the RAF under a direct purchase contract. It carried two .30-inch machine guns in the wings, in addition to the two .50-inch guns in the fuselage. A British radio was fitted. After the German invasion of the USSR in June 1941, 195 Tomahawk 2Bs were shipped to the USSR, some from the USA, others selected from the reserve force based in the United Kingdom. These Russian Tomahawks went into action on the Moscow and Leningrad fronts in October 1941 and were the first US-built planes to be used by the Russians in the new battle area. An unspecified number of Tomahawk 2Bs were sent to bolster Turkish neutrality in November 1941. Turkey was supplied with planes from both the Allies and the Axis during World War II. The Tomahawk 2s were active in the Middle East from October of 1941 onward. They shared in the strafing of the retreating Axis troops. The ability of the Tomahawk to absorb an incredible amount of punishment became almost legendary. They also served with the South African Air Force and the Royal Australian Air Force. At low altitudes, the Tomahawk 2 was actually superior to the Bf-109, but this advantage rapidly disappeared when combat took place at altitudes above 15,000 feet. The weight, which handicapped the performance of the Tomahawk, did have one tangible benefit. The rugged structure could absorb a terrific amount of battle damage and still allow the airplane to return to base. Although generally outclassed by the Bf-109, the Tomahawk was a capable fighter in the hands of experienced pilots. 150 P-40Fs were supplied to the RAF under Lend-Lease. The maximum speed of the P-40K was 320 miles per hour at 5,000 feet and 362 miles per hour at 15,000 feet. A climb to 15,000 feet took 7.5 minutes. Range was 350 miles with a 500-pound bomb attached. Ferry range was 1,600 miles. Weights were 6,400 pounds empty, 8,400 pounds gross, and 10,000 pounds maximum. By the summer of 1943, the performance of the P-40 Warhawk was leaving much to be desired, especially in comparison to later types, such as the P-38, P-47, and P-51, which were coming into service. The P-40N version was introduced at this time in an effort to improve the capabilities of the basic design and thus avoid interrupting Curtiss production lines by having the company introduce an entirely new type. A new lightweight structure was introduced. 2 of the 6 wing-mounted guns were removed, smaller and lighter undercarriage wheels were installed. Head armor was reintroduced, and aluminum radiators and oil coolers were installed. On February 14, 1944, another 1,000 Warhawks were ordered, consisting of 500 N-30s and 500 N-35s. As late as June 30, 1944, when the frontline equipment of all major air forces had far outpaced the potential of the P-40 series, an order for yet another 1,000 Warhawks was placed. This was the P-40N 40CU production block. However, this order was later cut back to 220 aircraft. The N-40 was powered by the V1710-115 engine of 1,360 horsepower and featured metal-covered ailerons. The N-40 variant dispensed with the camouflage finish. It included improved non-metallic self-sealing fuel tanks, new radio and oxygen equipment, and flame-damping exhausts. The last production Warhawk was a P-40N 40CU, which left the assembly line on November 30th, 1944. It was the 13,738th P-40 built. Many of the P-40Ns were shipped to Allied air forces under Lend-Lease and comprised the majority of the 1,097 P-40s sent to the USSR. Most of their operational flying took place in the Pacific in fighter, bomber, or escort roles. In U.S. Army Air Force service, the P-40N was relegated largely to training roles, as later types such as the P-51 Mustang or the P-47 Thunderbolt became increasingly available in quantity. Although the RAF evaluated the P-40Ns in the United Kingdom, they were employed solely abroad. Most of the RAF Kitty Hawk 4s were phased out of service early in 1945, but one RAF squadron continued to operate the Kitty Hawk 4 until the end of hostilities. These Kitty Hawk 4s were primarily operated in the Southwest Pacific campaigns as low-altitude fighter and ground attack aircraft. They were progressively replaced by Mustangs and Spitfires during the last year of the war, but the Kitty Hawks continued to serve with RAF squadrons until the end of hostilities. "172 P-40Ns were supplied to New Zealand. 35 P-40Ns were supplied to Canada. 41 P-40Ns were supplied to Brazil, where some served until 1958. An unspecified number were delivered to the Royal Netherlands East Indies Air Corps. They flew them against the Japanese in the latter stages of the war, then against the nationalist rebels in Indonesia until February of 1949. A large proportion of the 2,097 P-40s supplied to the Soviet Union were of the P-40N variety, but they were not very popular with the Russians, who considered them incapable of absorbing as much battle damage as the P-39 era Cobra. The P-40Q was an experimental project which attempted to produce a really modern fighter out of the existing P-40. The proposed production models of the P-40Q were to have carried either 6 .50-inch machine guns or 4 20-millimeter cannon, but the XP-40Q was still inferior to contemporary production Mustangs and Thunderbolts, and development was therefore abandoned. Consequently, the production life of the P-40 ended with the N version. It was in Asia that the Warhawk was crucial at the beginning of the war. It was one of the few planes capable of fighting the Japanese. Still, their brave pilots could not stop the enemy onslaught. The Philippines fell. The United States was not yet geared up for war, but China was already fighting Japan. 100 RAF Tomahawks were released to China and served with the American volunteer group, AVG, the famous Flying Tigers. It is with the Flying Tigers that the P-40 achieved immortality. Newly promoted to Brigadier General in the Chinese Army, Claire Chennault went to the USA in November 1940 to recruit pilots for the AVG. General Chennault ordered 100 P-40s through a loan from the U.S. government. By the time of Pearl Harbor, some 80 American pilots were serving with the AVG, based at Kunming and Mingaladang. Contrary to popular understanding, the AVG did not actually enter combat until after Pearl Harbor. The famous shark's teeth marking did not originate with the Flying Tigers, but was copied from the markings used by the Tomahawks of the RAF's number 112 Squadron in North Africa. The AVG drew first blood on December 20th, destroying 6 out of 10 attacking Japanese bombers. When the AVG encountered the Japanese Zero for the first time, they initially underestimated the maneuverability of their opponent, and they lost 2 pilots on December 23rd. It was soon learned that it was not wise to mix it up with the Zero on a one-to-one basis because of the inferior maneuverability and climb rate of the Curtiss, but instead to use the P-40's superior speed and diving ability to advantage. The most effective tactic against the Zero was a diving pass followed by a rapid departure from the scene. The P-40 gained a reputation for ruggedness, which enabled many an AVG pilot to return safely home after his plane was damaged in combat. The AVG in China had been working its P-40Cs, Tomahawk 2Bs, pretty hard throughout January and February of 1942. Some were destroyed on the ground during Japanese strafing attacks, and others were lost in accidents. Cannibalization provided spares for those that could be kept airworthy. No more than 55 Curtiss fighters were available to the AVG at any one time. Without replacement, losses mounted rapidly, and the AVG was down to some 20 P-40Cs by March of 1942. That month, 30 P-40Es were transferred to China by air from Africa. The improved performance offered by these more potent P-40s was very useful against the Zero fighters, which were becoming more numerous in the Chinese theater. The AVG was absorbed into the U.S. Army Air Force as the 23rd Fighter Group on July 4th, 1942. At that time, it had been officially credited with the confirmed destruction of 286 Japanese aircraft, as against the loss of only 12 aircraft shot down, 8 pilots killed in action, and 4 missing. Most of the losses were on the ground, with 61 aircraft destroyed by Japanese strafing attacks or lost in accidents. The top-scoring AVG ace was Robert H. Neal, credited with 16 kills. 8 other pilots claimed 10 or more victories. The Flying Tigers accounted for more victories in proportion to their numbers than any other P-40 unit. By the end of the late 1940s, the P-40 had no role left. It might have been obsolete at the beginning of the war, but it had a lot of fight in it. By the time of the jet age, even a proven veteran like the Warhawk had no place. It was withdrawn from American service.